Diary of a Wimpy Kid. The ugly truth. The school lock-in continued, and after what happened earlier with those pictures, I think the grown-ups were just really sensitive about anything having to do with butts. Mr. Palmero said that if anyone needed to pass gas, they had to go behind the curtain on the stage to do it. So then a lot of the boys started taking turns telling Mr. Palmero that they needed to go behind the curtain, and then they'd make the most obnoxious noises that you can imagine. That went on for a while, and it kind of reached its peak when David Rosenberg went to the music room and brought back a tuba. I shouldn't be laughing. It's funny though. Right. Pull yourself together. Okay. I don't know if it was a coincidence or not, but right about that time, the heat went off in the auditorium. In fact, I think someone actually turned the air conditioner on. All I know is that everyone stayed in their sleeping bags after that. After a while, Mr. Palmero fell asleep, but all the boys were still awake. Some guys were saying this was just like a prison, and people were talking about busting out of there and going home. The problem was that all the exits were padlocked. I guess we should have known what we were getting into when they called this thing a lock-in. Albert Sandy said he'd seen a movie where some guy busted out of prison with a spoon, and a lot of people got pretty excited about that idea. But it turns out that it was just a bunch of Hollywood baloney, because we got some spoons from the kitchen, and we couldn't even make a dent in the linoleum floor. At about 1:30 in the morning, someone noticed flashing lights coming from outside. So we all went to the back of the auditorium to see what was going on. There was a guy from the tow truck company, and he was walking around to Mr. Palmero's car, which was parked in a disabled spot. We tried to get the tow guy's attention so he could break us out of school, but the guy never heard us, and he just towed away Mr. Palmero's car. I thought about waking Mr. Palmero up to tell him what happened, but I figured out we should just let him get some rest. By this time, it was so cold in the auditorium that us boys packed ourselves together like sardines to preserve body heat. I figured it was probably nice and toasty in the library media room, and I was seriously thinking about going back there and joining the girls. But then I figured out I'd probably get caught, and then I'd just be back where I started. I think I probably fell asleep around 2:30. Then, at 3, there was a pounding on the back door that woke everybody up. Mr. Palmero unlocked the door, and there were a bunch of angry parents standing outside. Apparently, they'd been trying to call their kids to make sure everything was okay, but the kids weren't answering because Mr. Tanner took everyone's mobile phones. So then the parents called one another and everyone got all in a panic. To make a long story short, the parents who came to the school took their kids home with them, and that left only 2 kids who didn't have their own phones, me and Rowley, and that was pretty awkward. Something tells me this whole lock-in idea was just a scheme set up by the parents and teachers to turn us kids off boy-girl parties. If that's true, then the mission was accomplished. Monday. I spent the weekend trying to recover from the lock-in since I got 0 sleep on Friday night. But I think the whole experience was just too much for my body, because this morning when I woke up, I felt sick. Now, I admit I've faked being sick before to get out of going to school, but usually Mum calls my bluff. But today, Mum took my temperature, and I guess it must have been pretty high because she said I needed to stay in bed. She said she had to spend all day at the library to study for her final test tonight, and she wouldn't be able to stay home to take care of me. Well, that kind of stunk, because the only good thing about being sick is having someone to fuss over you. Mum said Isabella was working today and that if there was an emergency I could go to her. But after Mum left, I locked my bedroom door because I was afraid Isabella might try to come into my room and take her nap. I must have dozed off around noon, and when I woke up there was a lot of commotion downstairs. The TV was turned up really loud, and I could hear what sounded like a bunch of women talking. I looked out of the window, and there were a ton of cars in the driveway and on the street. I didn't know what was going on, so I just stayed in my room. About half an hour later, Mum pulled up in her car and went inside the house. And 5 minutes after that, all these women streamed out the door, including Isabella. Mum walked upstairs to my room, and she was really steamed. She said she decided to come home early from the library to take care of me, and when she did, she walked in on a soap opera viewing party with all the maids from the neighborhood. Tonight, Mum had another house meeting and said that Isabella's services would no longer be required and that we were all going to have to pitch in around the house. Well, I was pretty happy to hear that, because now I can stop checking my bed for pantyhose socks. Tuesday. When I got to school today, Rowley was waiting by my locker, and he had a huge smile on his face. Then I noticed he had a big pimple right in the middle of his forehead. Most people would have stayed at home from school if they'd had a zit like that. But here's what Rowley said. "My mum says I'm becoming a man." Well, that really irked me for some reason. But that wasn't the end of it. Later on in the day, I saw Rowley hanging out near the older kids' lockers. So I guess he thinks just because he got a pimple, he's part of their club now, or something. I think it's really pathetic that Rowley's trying to impress people with his stupid zit. And believe me, I'm not jealous or anything, but this is a kid who still sleeps with a pile of stuffed animals every night. So it doesn't make any sense that he would get his first pimple before I got mine. I will say the whole episode has got me thinking. I've been trying to hit my growth spurt, or at least start growing some facial hair. But things have been kind of slow going. And now that Rowley's got a pimple, I'm kind of anxious to get things moving along. When I got home from school today, I checked myself in the mirror to see if anything seemed different. But everything looked exactly the same, as it always does. So, after dinner, I asked Mum and Dad when I could expect things to start happening. But they told me that when they were my age, they were way behind their classmates when it came to that sort of thing. Then Dad told me not to expect to get a lot of facial hair, even when I'm an adult, because he's a grown man and he only needs to shave once or twice a week. Well, that was some really bad news. In this country, they're always saying you can grow up and be anything you want. But now, I realize that's not true. I can name at least half a dozen jobs I can never have if I can't grow a beard or a mustache, or at least some decent stubble. Perhaps I could be a magician or a pirate or a lumberjack or an artist or a cop or maybe even a criminal. Wednesday. Today was day 2 of Rowley's pimple, and he was walking around with his hair parted like a curtain so everyone could get an eyeful of his zit. I couldn't really take another day of this, and I decided to do something about it. So I wrote a note and handed it to him in the hallway. Dear Rowley, nobody likes your zit. Signed, the girls. And I'm happy to say my note did the trick. But right before lunchtime, something totally crazy happened. Our class was heading to the cafeteria, and when we walked through the hallway, where the older kids have their lockers, Jordan Jury was standing there with a few of his friends. Jordan stopped us and said, "Hey, dudes, you're invited to my party." Well, I couldn't believe it. Like I said before, Jordan Jury's parties are legendary. But the best thing about Jordan Jury's parties is that there are girls there, which means his parties are totally different from the kind I usually get invited to. The point is, this is a real party we're talking about, and not like the lock-in, where there were a million chaperones running the show. I have no idea why Jordan Jury invited me, and Rowley, to his party. It could have been my maths book, or Rowley's zit, or maybe both. But it was pretty clear that he thought me and Rowley were friends, and that the invitation was a package deal. I didn't want to do anything that might change his mind, so I went along with it. I can definitely pretend I'm friends with Rowley for one night if it means I get to play spin the bottle with a bunch of girls who are a whole grade ahead of me.